Hello and welcome to your award-winning The Reasons I'm Broke podcast, bringing you the reasons we're broke, ranging from comics, movies, TV, video games, and more. I'm Daniel, and today we have, as promised, the reviews, the discussion of the Snyder cuts of Rebel Moon from Netflix, and different titles on these: Rebel Moon Part 1, Chalice of Blood, and Rebel Moon Part 2, Curse of Forgiveness. And to help break down this director's cut versus Netflix PG-13 cut is the man who reviewed Part 1, Child of Fire, for you right here on the show. It is Millenial Mike. Welcome back, Millennial.
Good to be here. How you doing this evening?
I'm doing good. I'm excited. I just finished Part 2 literally like 30 minutes ago. I watched it during my lunch break today, and then I watched some more today right before we recorded. So I am excited to dive into this discussion. And Rebel Moon's been all over the place. It's been all over X. It's been all over Facebook. And I do want to say that we did mention you for the Part 2 review because we were like, Millennial is sticking to his principles. He is sticking to what he said. At first, you were like, well, I didn't want to see the Netflix cut, but I'll watch it for the review. And I'm like, no, Millennial, you stick to your principles. You do what you want to do. And you did. You stuck to your promise. You didn't see Part 2 until the Snyder cut of it released. So how did that feel waiting until the Snyder cut's released before you saw Part 2? Were you ever at all, was there ever a moment of weakness for you?
Oh no, not even close. I mean, I'm not even close, man. I saw the first part of the Netflix cut, and I'm like, well, it's funny. I guess I'll say it this way. When I watched the Snyder cut, the director's cuts, it's Chalice of Blood, Curse Forgiveness, right? It's in that order, correct?
Yeah.
Or verse, yeah. I actually realized that I wish I would have just skipped both of them. And, I actually regret, because the thing is that whenever I saw something that was in the original, that amount of novelty was lost, So even though the context was a little bit different because of the way that the scenes were edited, the way they were cut, the order that they appeared in, the color grading, the lines, the takes that they used on this version versus the last version, the tone, the style, the music, everything that like changed from the first to the second, even still, I just felt like lost there. And I really didn't enjoy those first movies that much. So I kind of just wish I could have gone into this as if it were the first time that I saw this franchise or movie at all. But
I think one of the nice things about it, though, is when you go back and watch this, say, months from now or a year from now, I think most of the director's cuts it'll feel novel again when you rewatch it. If we know anything about Zack, is that his films are very rewatchable. They age like fine wine, and I think Rebel Moon is going to be another example. Like right after I finished Rebel Moon Part 2, I'm like, I want to dive back into Army of the Dead. Like it's been a little while since I've seen that.
I agree that his films are rewatchable. I will say that you weren't able to watch this movie until 30 minutes before we started recording.
Finish it, right.
Because you probably couldn't watch 6 hours of a movie. I mean, you have a family, right?
That's true.
When it came out. So the reason why his movies are rewatchable is because of the themes. Like, there's so much layered. It's like a diamond. You can look at it from different angles and get new pieces of it. So the movies are crafted in such a way that if you put the energy into it, you're rewarded for it. At the same time, many of his movies, especially his director's cuts, are quite long. So just due to the amount of time that it takes, that kind of prohibits rewatches sometimes. But
yeah, it definitely does. And I hope that one day I'll have the time to do I think it was Koj that was posting up pictures. He posted up that Q&A from I think it was LA screening. It's always California, right? He's lucky. He looks out that it's always over there. And they had both cuts, the Snyder cuts back to back, and they had a 60-minute intermission. So he was watching that thing for 8.5 hours. He was out there.
That's crazy.
I would have liked to have had that experience.
I mean, I did it too.
Yeah, that's true. You did. You sacrificed sleep, though.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I am a zealot. I'm a cultist. So the moment that it came out, well, not the moment it came out. I mean, I was literally at work when it came out, and I was checking my phone throughout the day. I'm like, oh, stop doing this, stop, you know. And then as soon as I got home, I showered and then I sat in front of my computer. It was already late. By the time I was done, it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was a work day the following day. So
Of course.
you know, it was extremely irresponsible, but this is what I do.
Once in a while.
Fan.
It's all right.
I mean, I'm literally not going to do this for pretty much anything else.
That's true. Yeah, like when's the next time?
Yeah.
Twilight of the Gods, right? I think is the next one, but even then, it's not
going to be as long, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it won't be 6.5 hours. So I want to give a little background on Rebel Moon as far as discuss the premise and the setting and compare it. Well, we're discussing both cuts in a way, but primarily the Snyder cuts of this, Chalice of Blood and Curse of Forgiveness. And on this one, just to be clear, because it's still a little confusing, I see a lot of questions as to why, even with Snyder fans, like, why wasn't this released first? How come this one didn't go out first? And I understand the question, but just to give a little background, Zack has talked about this, and there was an agreement between him and Netflix of they wanted him to create the PG-13 cuts and his versions. And from what I understand, or what I gathered, he filmed both. He filmed it all. He didn't go back and reshoot an R-rated version. Some of the takes, Zack said, they filmed them back to back. Okay, now this one's going to be for the R cut, and then they filmed it. I believe that for the most part, these cuts, Chalice of Blood and Curse of Forgiveness, they're his films, and then from that, he cut it down to the PG-13 cuts for Netflix, which are the ones that hit the top 10, hit the number 1 spots. The Snyder cuts did not hit the number 1 spot when they released on opening weekend, but it's something for the fans. This is something that Netflix allowed Zack, or there was an agreement, whatever it is. I don't even know if allowed is the right word, but there was an agreement. We're going to release 4 versions. Zack's okay with it. He wants to do that. And he put it as they got 4 films for the price of 2. That's the way he put it, which is what makes me think that's my line of thought. It wasn't like they paid him for 4. It was, he made 2 films and then he just made 4 cuts of the thing. Mm-hmm. So that's a little background on it. This is why those 4 versions exist. There's no studio meddling in case this is listened to a couple years down the line. This is what we know of right now in 2024. This was all intentional. It's an agreement and you get to choose. Zack at one point said, there's a non-bloody version for anyone that complains there's too much blood and gore. There's literally, it's there.
Well, now you get to choose.
Now you get to choose, yeah.
Now you get, how many months ago did the first version come out?
December. Yeah, Christmas. So, it's a Christmas film.
Yep. So all that time you didn't get to choose all that time, but you get to choose now if you care.
Now you get to choose. So that's a little background on this Rebel Moon. Very much like Excalibur, especially when you watch the Snyder cuts. And comparing the two, so we're looking at 6.5 hours compared to 4 hours. So you're getting about 2 extra hours of content on these Snyder cuts. And I know you didn't see part 2, the Netflix cut on it, but speaking on the runtime first, did you feel the extra time as you were watching, just comparing part 1, because I know those are ones you saw, as you were watching that, did you feel like it felt longer, or did that even at all come into mind? Did you ever go, oh, this is getting a little long, let me look at the time, and you're watching part 1?
The pacing was so much better that to me, it actually felt just as long, maybe even, so it's always hard to express this particular thought because we always say, oh, this movie's too long. But what people actually mean is that it's just not paced well. We don't really have the vocabulary to say that a movie is kind of drudging along without also acting as though the runtime, like bringing the runtime into it. Like the runtime has a lot less to do with the pacing of movies than I think a lot of us actually give credit to. But I think that the director's cuts definitely just flowed a lot better. Not to mention the improvements they've made just make it more enjoyable to actually watch the movie. So you're not thinking about the runtime as much.
I saw that Manu, who's on your show, The Film Exiles, actually was saying that a lot of these scenes flowed better with more dialogue. and I know that's something that you, me, and Matt discussed. And by the way, Matt wanted to be on this review, but he is in the middle of moving. He's not going to even be able to enjoy these two until 2 weeks from now. So shout out to Matt, who was originally going to be on here. But Manu's saying that it flowed better. I think that supports what you're saying, because I felt the same way when there were more scenes, and then there were the extended versions of what I saw in the first two parts. And by him saying they flowed better, I exactly agree with that, where it did not feel longer. The dialogue was a lot smoother, even though there was more of it. It just didn't feel as jolted as it was going from one line to the next. There was more, I don't want to say fluff, because it was all important. It was all adding to the dimension to each character. They did not feel, and I wouldn't say they felt flat in the original cuts, because I like those, but they were more fleshed out, all of these characters. And we're going to talk about the content soon, but the runtime itself, it did not feel longer. Extra scenes, I was invested in all of them. None of them felt like, well, we could have lost this. What time is it? I don't ever see myself watching the Netflix cuts for the runtime ever. Like, well, let me save myself an extra hour. No, I want all of the lore. And that's what he gave us with all this extra runtime. It's extra lore. It's not just more slowed down. None of that.
Yeah. You know, it's very difficult to, I would say, affirm a certain editing decision, just as difficult as it is to criticize a certain editing decision, because we really don't, because editing is a process and several different priority decisions have to be made that ultimately result in the final product. And who knows what the whole entire thought process that led to the final product was. So it's extremely difficult to edit it. You can kind of just make like a final sweeping statement and say, I liked it, or I didn't like it, or why did they take this out or that out? But we'll really never know. I mean, you could ask people about individual situations, but the truth is that like there's a whole philosophy to what you choose to keep, what you should take out. And I feel as though there's a universe where there's a PG-13 cut, right? Just based on the explicitness, rating, and things like that. But it has a lot of this the scenes that flesh it out. And it pretty much flows and feels just about as good as the director's cut. It maybe might feel a little jilted here or there when they're editing out like the strikes, like someone's about to strike someone else shoots someone else. Like they edit like kind of the results of that out. Mm-hmm. So it might feel a little weird there, but for the most part, it still feels like a pretty highbrow quality, like really well paced and edited sci-fi film that wasn't what we got. And I feel like it would take a lot of effort for me to really watch these movies and just deeply analyze it to figure out perhaps if they could have made better decisions there. It's hard for me to say, but I think a lot of people are basically kind of hand waving away some of the criticisms of the Netflix cut because, oh, well, you know, Netflix needed 2 hours. So that's what, right. But is it possible you could have, there's a lot of 2-hour sci-fi epics that are top tier, you know? And if with all the foreknowledge and all the planning that you did in advance before you started on the movies, who's to say that you couldn't have made that happen? You know, just like any other director. So yeah, I'm a little miffed about that, but hey, the director's cuts are awesome.
Absolutely, they are. Before we go into the actual comparative, or at least discussion on these Snyder cuts, clearly the PG-13 cut was successful. It was viewed millions of times, and it hit the #1 spot. If they're doing this again with his next feature film, not Twilight of the Gods, that one's an animated, but let's say he's doing another live action movie. If they present him, do you think they should try to replicate this success by saying, okay, let's do this again and release 2 versions of it? If you want to do an R-rated version, do a PG-13 and see if we can replicate the magic. I guess what I'm asking is, do you think it would have had the same level of success if it wasn't the Netflix cuts and it was straight Snyder cuts, Chalice of Blood and Curse of Forgiveness? Would it have had the same viewership, the #1 spots, the success? It is now its own original IP that I think we're going to go way more of. There's already a podcast out of it. would we have seen any of this if there wasn't a Netflix cut?
That's a question that I also don't think has really been given a fair shake from both a critical standpoint as well as a, wow, he pulled it off standpoint, like a praising standpoint. I think most people are praising it. I think a lot of times people criticize it, they do it in bad faith, so it gets hand waved. And for good reason, because a lot of times it's like people sound really, really dumb when they make these criticisms. They're not really trying to be rigorous about it. What I would say is that, okay, Netflix controls every aspect of your experience once you get into their portal. Once you get into the Netflix experience, you're on that. They control everything. Like a video, you can't get a video to stop playing. Like something's always playing. There's always some sound whenever you hover your mouse or over a thumbnail. They don't even distinguish between movies and series. The purpose of this is, and I'm actually writing an article, which is taking me a little bit longer than I expected to, about like the whole digital world that we're living in and how this is affecting how we view content. And that's really what it is. It's just content, right? You see a little thumbnail, there's a picture on it. You see a trailer, you push it, and then once you're already in it, you then figure out that it's either a series or a movie. So with the lines blurring between movies and series so much, and Netflix being at the forefront of that, I mean, who is really pressing on a movie and then like they see like the little, then they move their mouse down to the end of the the little progress bar to see what the end time is, and like, oh, I can't do that, and then they stop. Like they're not like, no. If the movie is good and the pacing is good and it just keeps them invested the entire time, they're going to stay in the entire time. So I think that some of the excuses that it wouldn't do well enough. Now, this is the thing. If you make it R instead of PG-13, yes, you will take some bit of an L. You will take a loss. But the question is in any case, is whether the authenticity and the artistic integrity of the work that you're making is worth however much loss you are taking. Like, is it possible that it could have still justified its existence and been the director's cut? I don't know, but I feel like if there's anyone who can do it, it's Netflix. They could absolutely do it if anyone could.
Let's dive into the story and narrative between these films, because we noticed that, at least when we're looking at part one, because that's the one you watched, the plot and character development is different between both cuts. Looking at part one, which character do you feel suffered the most from a PG-13 cut after having seen Chalice of Blood?
Well, see here, Belisarius, he wasn't even in the first part, was he?
He only at the very end when he's talking to.
So yeah, obviously him.
and then wasn't the flashback was that was in part one as well, wasn't it? Yeah, when she was a little girl, because she explains
so that
he was in there too.
Yeah, the whole flashback, whoever was in the flashback benefited from that. And Belisarius was mostly in the flashback, and he wasn't in the first part outside of the flashback in the Netflix cut. But I think that all the characters really benefited a lot because that's kind of where they're gathering the team. And in the first one, the reason why I disliked the Netflix cut so much is because it felt like they kind of went to a place and then the person kind of just ran into them and they said, "Hey, are you this person?" And they said, "Yeah." And then like they barely like communicated. There was like no friction. There was nothing. And they were kind of just like, it was like playing like an RPG video game or something like that. And it just didn't feel very, I didn't like it. It didn't feel right to me. So in the director's cut, I really felt like they fleshed that out more. They gave the characters like more of an introduction. And when you first introduce a character, it really has an impact on your connection with that character and your relationship with that character throughout the entire story. So giving all those characters such a great start, a much better start, it massively helped them throughout the rest of the two movies.
That was my biggest criticism of that first part, was exactly that, where it felt like, okay, here you are. It was like the Wizard of Oz. Let's just go and follow the yellow brick road. Whereas in this one, Nemesis, they have that scene in the ramen shop or wherever they are, and that extends it. That leads that smoother into the battle with Armada. There's more dialogue between Nemesis and Armada, and there's just way more there that it just carries you a lot. So it takes its time. It's showing you. It's making it more believable that these characters exist, which helps me believe that, okay, there is a little bit of, sometimes there's a convincing that takes place. Sometimes, like in General Titus,
Yeah.
the scene was great in the Netflix cut, but there was a lot more dialogue. There was more suffering from Titus as he's getting cleaned.
Honestly, I feel like Titus he had the worst introduction. You know, he had the worst introduction for me in the Netflix cut. He benefited the most from the director's cut, in my opinion. Armada, I actually feel like they might have, even in the director's cut, I feel like maybe they could have done a little more, because they kind of ran into Nemesis. They kind of ran into Nemesis, and it felt really convenient in the first one. In the second one, they had this cool scene where she was like sitting down, and I think like someone like walked by where she was, and then she was just kind of there. There was some cool transition that they used. I forgot how they introduced her, but it was a lot cooler in the director's cut. And
it almost seemed like she was sitting for a minute listening to them first to see who they were, what their deal was.
Yeah, and just the way that the scene was shot and the visuals were really good. So I liked just watching it was fun. Although when I think about it, I'm kind of like, like this town they're in is probably pretty big, and just the fact that it didn't seem like they had like a lot of direction, like they really knew what they were doing. So the fact they just happened to run into her and she didn't know they were coming, it was just kind of like, maybe I missed something. But
there is a line. Yes, there is a line that says, "I put out the call. She should be here." One of the characters says that. I think it might have been.
Okay.
Forgot his name. Oliver Queen, Green Arrow himself.
Gotcha. Okay, so it's because of his.
Kai.
So that makes sense. Yeah, Kai, right. So I'm sure maybe that was even in the first one too. What I might have missed, I don't know.
The first one it wasn't. They just showed up and she was there. They're just with her.
But why would he? And so there's a lot of questions to be asked. I mean, why not just keep that one line? But anyway.
Well, they cut that whole scene. The whole ramen shop scene was gone.
Okay,
and the Netflix
that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, again, it's asking these questions just feels kind of like just a labor in futility, because who knows? There could be several legitimate reasons why they did it. I'll never know, but all I can tell you is how it felt after it was made. But yeah, I think it Titus benefited the most. Turok, I think, I'm trying to remember. They had a flashback scene with him. No, that came. Yeah, because he was in chains, and then he was thinking back, and then they went to the flashback, correct?
Yeah, but it doesn't. Well, they go to the flashback when they're around the table. That's when
that's in part 2 before they're about to battle. Yeah, I'm trying to remember how much they added, if they did anything. I will say
no, not that I remember.
Yeah, they didn't really. And honestly, one of my criticisms actually of the original is still present in the current one, where the interactions between characters and CG characters, like, actors, live action characters and CG characters, feels like they're not connecting when they're actually touching. So the Binu, which is the griffin-like creature, and Turok, when he's sitting on it, it feels like something out of a straight to Netflix movie. and when he jumps off that cliff, I mean, dude, that's the most epic Zack Snyder-esque shot, when he goes slow motion, he's fully extended. Like, that's just so sick, right? But then the very next scene, you go from this pure cinema to him kind of coming at this weird angle where you can just see the little rig, right? Off the side of the camera, outside the camera's lens, where he just jumps and then lands on this little feathery thing. It just didn't feel like this force that you jumped off the cliff with, and that trajectory you came at, and then you kind of just land kind of it just doesn't feel right. It just does not feel right. I had another complaint about that little exploding alien in the beginning too,
Yes.
when he was touching the face.
Right.
I tried to get into it, but but the more that I watch it and the more that it kind of not dragged on, but went on, I'm like, okay, there's something this isn't hitting. This is not happening. It's not happening. Although I think that the scene was acted well and everything about the scene was done well. It's just the actual CG assets were they weren't as polished as I think they could have been.
Yeah, that needed more time. I agree with the Griffin as well. When he's sitting on it, it just doesn't look like it was right. There is one part that I noticed they polished up more, and that was on Jimmy's introduction. Because in the first one, I remember the shot very clearly, and I wonder if they went back and corrected it in the Netflix cut. But there's the camera set up from the right, and you kind of get this medium shot of Jimmy coming out. There's smoke, and it didn't look real. It looked like it was unfinished. And then in this one, it's from the left, and it's a little further out. And when he comes out, it looks finished. Like it's almost like a completely different shot, almost. Because I don't remember the kid being in that same scene when he comes out for it.
Do you think that? So I think this is where we need to get our narrative straight here. So I don't even know this, so I'm not sure. Maybe I don't have all the facts. But earlier in this podcast, we kind of said, well, what we think they did is they made his cut, and then they out of that cut the PG-13 cuts.
Right
now, I know that during the making of the movie, he actually filmed things twice, so he had all this. So it's kind of like, so there might be a mixture of that. He shot, of course he's going to storyboard, he's going to plan all that in advance. And then from all the material that he has, he'll basically make two different movies. I'm sure that just the sheer difficulty of doing this created some kinds of compromises that had to be made on both ends, because that's incredibly difficult. Like, if it isn't difficult enough to just make one single movie, right? So the fact that he did both is good, but the reason why I even bring that up is because, like, for instance, if Jimmy wasn't polished in the theatrical cut, the Netflix cut, why would he be polished in the original cut if they're the same cut?
Right, unless it has to be two different shots, yeah.
Right, unless in the past 8 months he was working on the CG and then released it only like a week ago. I don't know.
Yeah, it's got to be. I might fire up the Netflix cut and get to that scene to see if it's the same scene or not, or if it's different. If it's different, then it's simply two different shots. Like, they didn't put, what's his name, Eris into the same shot when he's coming out, but in the director's cut, he's on there. So that was better for sure. Like, it was a completely. But yeah, when you see the little, what was the alien's name? The non-Baby Yoda thing that explodes.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, I loved it. But and it was great that it had its own little scene. Like, I knew it was going to have some kind of retaliation, some kind of attack. I almost expected it to transform into like this big beast or something and start fighting off some of these guys.
I the only reason why I didn't post this to my Twitter page was because I couldn't find the picture of that forearm thing that splits that guy in half. That little guy, I think he turns into that guy.
That's insane. Oh my god.
That'd be cool. Doesn't it?
It fits.
Yeah. Because don't they both have 4 arms?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could be very much true.
Yeah.
Send that to Zack. Put it on Bureau. Hey, ask him.
you heard it here first. I just couldn't find the picture of the. So that's the reason why I didn't post it. But I was gonna say this guy turns into this guy.
Yes, this is his evolved form right there.
What is what's the Pokemon with the
Machamp.
Machamp.
Yeah, that's Machamp, Brace Fair.
Baby Machamp, yeah. Yeah, that's funny.
While we're talking about Eris, because that reminded me, that whole opening scene where you see Noble and this family, and you just see the cruelness of him. It was like, okay, that's Eris, because I believe they say the kid's name. Yeah, he says, "What's your name, Eris?" And he yells it. When you see him grown up in the village and he's one of the soldiers, I gave more of a shit for him. Like, now I cared about him when that opening scene came out. He benefited huge on my viewing, because at first I'm just like, who's this random soldier that's just going to betray them? Why is he betraying them? Like, they didn't explain that. And then in this cut, it's like, oh, that all makes sense. He's this kid. So if it's perfect, like, now that character, I like him a lot more. He was one of my least favorites in Netflix cut, and
Yeah,
now it makes a
yeah.
lot more sense.
Yeah, I totally get it. Yeah, I don't have a fully fledged thought, but I'll kind of just spit out some words. um, so for whatever reason, I didn't sympathize with him very much, and even when he is being a antagonistic force to these obviously very like evil, kind of just aggressive, authoritarian soldiers that are kind of just being ignorant or whatever. I actually kind of felt annoyed on their behalf just because I didn't like them, you know. And I think that I think that you're just supposed to like him because it doesn't like them, and they're so bad, and if they're bad, then he's good, so you're supposed to just like him. But when you actually flesh him out, you get to see kind of like him interact in other ways earlier in the flashback and things like that. I think it just makes it feel, by the time you get to that, you are a little bit more familiar, and you don't feel like the only connection you have with the character is just the fact that he's not the bad guy. Like I always hate that kind of moral relativist like sympathy thing that movies try to do, where it's like you're always just supposed to like automatically relate to the character who is less bad because that's just how you're supposed to feel. They just assume you're going to feel that way. But yeah, the director's cut definitely fixed that, in my opinion.
And that did the same with the Villagers too, because that was one of Matt's criticisms. Was it felt like, okay, they're with these warriors for like a day or whatever, or however long, and here's these flags to remember you by, and you're great for this, and you've got a heart of gold. And but when you see them, more scenes of them interacting in the farm fields, having sex, like they're doing all kinds of shit. Like it felt like even the villagers were more fleshed out. The extra scenes that scene made more sense now when they were giving out these flags or whatever, these gifts to these warriors as a thank you, and how they were growing to like each other. Even the rift between the warriors themselves, like they're calling Tarek a coward, which wasn't in the director's or in the Netflix cut. Like it shows that they didn't just all get along from the get-go. It probably took that village, that experience at the village, for all of them to connect as family. And that was way more believable as well. I think that all the characters in the village definitely benefited from that.
Also too, one thing that I like about this movie, the director's cut, is that so a lot of times, and I've heard this criticism at multiple different angles, multiple different ways. A lot of people will say like, man, I really wish we had stories about good and evil, right? Like I want like more like stories about good and evil, and I'm tired of like the anti-hero or the characters that are kind of like morally gray, or like, you have like a really like dark villain, but then you have a darker, or a dark hero, but then you have a darker villain, like the boys. And people kind of want something that's more like what Star Wars kind of represented. But then also people feel kind of like if you have a mustache twirly villain who's just so irreconcilably evil that it's just, it might feel kind of corny, or like you're just trying to like shove it down the audience's throat, so to speak. So you kind of hear these two things from similar kinds of people, and it's like, okay, so what do you actually do? Like, how can you actually make this work? I think that Zack made it work really well in the director's cut, because I think that it was clear that Noble had this very kind of like aura about him that's like very, the condescending aura, like, oh, I'm just the most evilest guy around, don't you know? But then you didn't actually get to see him perpetrate any vile atrocities of evil. So you really don't have like a kind of a distaste for his character. But then and that's in the Netflix cut. But then in the director's cut, this is the baddest dude. Yeah. So I feel like, and also his acting is just amazing. He does a great job. Ed Skrein, I don't know how to pronounce his name. So I really feel like this kind of does the job. It fixes the complaints that I think a lot of people have with movies, that the characters are either too mustache twirly, and they usually say that because they don't really actually get to perpetrate any sort of horrific, vile acts upon innocent, people in the movies or the stories. So it's like, okay, this guy is not really, he's just twirling his mustache. Like that's what makes him evil. But in this, it's like, no, the things that he has done has made him evil. And when he speaks this way, it makes sense. So I just really like that he was fleshed out. I think he benefited a ton from the director's cut.
When I read the novelization of Child of Fire and it opens with this scene, I'm like, there's no way they do that. Like, how do they do this in the film if it's actually in the Snyder cut? And he just does it. Like, it's just the same exact fucking scene. I'm like, he mows down the kid, he murders the family, he kills the dad, takes the kid, slaughters the rest. I'm like, they just fucking did it. Like, he is truly here he is, pure evil incarnate at the beginning of the fucking movie, the opening, utter hopelessness, right?
Yeah.
This is who that is.
Oh, the teeth thing, oh my goodness, adds so much.
Yeah,
the scribes.
Yes.
Yeah, they
were fleshed out.
Yeah. Oh yeah, dude, and their design is so sick.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, crush the heads of the leaders of these nations, these villages, these towns. They crush the heads. They rip the teeth out of their skulls and then stick their teeth in this mural, enshrouding the Princess Issa, which they also killed. But it's kind of like, oh, we're doing this like in her name, right?
It's so twisted.
And it's and it's like, and the thing is that the tooth mural actually looks really nice.
Well, they were careful in picking out the tooth, and they're praying around it. Like, it's the whole thing they're describing.
Yeah. It really is a harrowing, daunting force that you're dealing with. And it's not something to be trifled with. It's not a joke. It's not like, and you don't ever get the sense that anyone that they come in contact with isn't in danger.
Right.
So I appreciate that too. I will say that some of the foot soldiers, they got a little bit of a stormtrooper thing going on. Although it's not as bad. And it's not really a big complaint, but they do get mowed down pretty easily.
Yeah. Sometimes they do. Well, speaking of which, the visual effects, the biggest difference between the two is there's a lot more blood and gore in this. There's a lot more sex and nudity. And that's one of the things that the special effects they had to really work on in that, because it's a lot easier to cut away or to do the guy falling and here's a little effect of a heat ray or whatever it is. But here they have splashes of blood all over the place, pieces of skull and bone and flesh going all over. And it was fully added, and especially in part 2 where you see any death is a bloody one in these cuts.
Yeah. Well, I miss like the OG lightsabers, man. And this reminded me, it's just, what could possibly be more deadly than a super hot piece of like metal or like a laser? It's like, so whenever those things are swinging around, that someone's not going to look the same. Like, they're not going to get a proper burial. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, so yeah, I much appreciate that, because it just makes like when two people are fighting with the sword or even the guns, because the guns are like these like metal slags that they shoot out. They're like a shotgun with I forget what you call it, but like it focuses it in, so it's like a precise shotgun.
What I like
it'll blow a massive hole in you.
Exactly. Yeah, you see the damage that all these weapons do, and that felt more realistic. It felt more deadly. It felt like the stakes were a lot higher. In the Netflix cut, it's like, oh, well, maybe that one will live. Like, you'll see a little bit of that, but here it's like, no, this is straight war, straight death. Every weapon is deadly. It's not just the laser swords that are going to kill you, or these guns will also blow you up into pieces. Like, one shot of these and your head's fucking gone. It's obliterated, or pieces of your body are just gone. So all of that being added in there. There were some spots where in the bridge towards the end when Titus is running across and there's a bunch of these stormtrooper guys dying and there's blood going. In the slow motion parts, some of that blood looked too clean when it was added in, because there's clearly supposed to be dust or something in front of it. It just looked way too clean. Like they could
I agree.
Muted it a little. So that's one
there
thing.
There were some scenes where like the blood definitely felt like it was kind of added, and I think that it's really important that when you're making your story that you make that feel as like integral to the scene as possible, especially when the narrative is out that this is just like a beefed up version of the original. Or see, that's even I'm using the improper language. This is the original, and that's the reason that it has less to do with the actual movie itself, but that certainly didn't help the narrative. But yeah, I think that they did a pretty good job for the most part. But there were some scenes that, like you said, felt a little bit like it was added on top and it wasn't like a part of the scene.
Yeah, because there clearly wasn't always some wet work going on with the soldiers. There were sometimes, and you can tell when like blood is spilling, but otherwise, yeah, there was a lot added on after the fact, and some of it wasn't as clean. But one thing that definitely helped was, I don't know if you noticed too, because you didn't see part two, or the Netflix cuts, but the creatures, the aliens, there was way more of that in the director's cuts than there were in the Netflix cut. You get the little blowing up alien, you see the little rats that kind of scurry around the ships, which I don't remember being in the Netflix cuts. You get more shots of Machamp in the Coliseum ripping that guy apart.
Did that horse in the first part with the Jimmies poop in the original?
I didn't notice that. No, I don't think they did.
Yeah, because there's a horse in the background that just poops, and it just yeah. So I'm like, wait, that wasn't. I know I would have seen that in the original. If I rewinded it a few times. Like, yep, he definitely
he's pooping.
He's pooping. Yeah.
Yeah. So there might have even been more scenes with the horses. I'm pretty sure there was. And then there's the one alien space trooper guy that comes in at part two that's voiced by Zack Snyder, where he's inside the X-Wing and they're all like cleaning up the rest of the ships and he kind of dies or kamikazes. There's an extra scene of him actually doing that. So all of these extra bits, the bird, those little alien birds that are flying in and Jimmy touches one and all the little fireflies in the field, the director's cuts truly felt a lot more fantasy sci-fi than the Netflix cuts. The Netflix, it's like, oh, here's a little sprinkling of, and I think that's something Matt might have said of like, I feel like there would have been more fantastical aliens, not just in the little cantina, but even in the cantina, they expanded on the blue alien who's like, I'm not going to fuck that guy. He is disgusting. And the guy's like, shut up and do your job. Like there was more of that where it felt like a truly fantasy world that was just all cut out.
And also too, what I've noticed is that when you watch the director's cuts, I really don't. I almost feel kind of like the split between the first second movie is kind of arbitrary in that it's not. I won't say that. Let me say it this way: when you go to the theater and you watch, superhero movie number one, right, and then you wait a little while, and then they announce that the second movie is coming out, and then you go to watch superhero movie number two, right? After you finish watching both those movies, you think about how the movies play between each other, and they definitely feel like two movies in your head. You buy both of them on DVD, Blu-ray, you bring them home, you watch them both in order, and each movie definitely feels like their own separate movies. So you have that, but then you have the director's cuts of Rebel Moon. It feels like the exact same movie. Like you can just watch it all the way through, and yeah, like maybe there's like a narrative beat where it kind of cuts, but that's it. You could have just put it in one movie if you wanted to.
Yeah, I know what you mean, where it feels like there's a clear difference between Cap 1 and Cap 2, or Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, or even like when you said part 1 and 2 of a film like Dune more recently.
Right, because they're trying to bring you back into the movie. Like whenever it's a sequel, they're trying to like get you like reinvested. They're trying to get you back into it. Whereas in this, they don't. It's just like,
here's the next part of the story. They don't take the time to like, here, let's reintroduce these guys in case you forgot. Like, it's not in there.
Yeah,
like, we're gonna
or
keep
anything.
moving.
It's because you know how like a beginning of the movie has like it's kind of slow. Like it's not even just about the introductions, but it kind of like gets you. It opens up the world again, but it's like this is just the next scene basically.
Yeah, and it works really well. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think exactly. I'm not even saying it's a bad thing. It's actually a great thing. But yeah, it's so when people like try to say like, oh, in this movie or that movie, I'm always racking my brain like, okay, when did one movie end and the other begin? Like, I guess the first movie is basically about collecting the guys, and the second movie is about the war for the grain, basically.
Right. The themes and the tone in comparison, did you get more of an Excalibur / medieval feel, like even more than sci-fi in parts with Rebel Moon, the director's cuts, than you did in the Netflix cut? Because the extra scenes of like the stained glass windows, the kingdoms, the flashbacks of Princess Issa, and even the flashbacks of Korra talking to the king, like all of that stuff that wasn't in the original cut or in the Netflix cut.
I think the color grading was even a little bit different too.
Yes, Zack confirmed that.
The scene. I'm certain of it. The scene, Nemesis versus Armada, which honestly is probably one of my favorite scenes in the both movies. Even though I definitely prefer the second movie better because it's just the epic conclusion, right? The second part.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't even honestly like to say I like one movie or the other because it's like principally not two different movies. It's only technically two movies. So
yeah,
I like, oh, do you like the first part of this movie, the second part? It's like, well, you need to watch both.
Exactly.
But I love the Nemesis versus Armada scene. Like, there's this scene where they're all standing side by side, and you're looking at like a puddle, so you see like them like inverted on the puddle, and it's just like, you have to see it, man. I mean, you did, but oh my god, it was amazing. I'm like, Martin Scorsese's cinema, like it was so good. There was a scene like that, and this is completely unrelated, but I'm saying it anyway. Kevin Costner's Horizon Part 1. I saw that in theater. There was a scene like that where it had like Kevin Costner like inverted in this water trough, and like you saw like the water kind of rippling, and then it kind of like slowed down, and you saw him. And, it was so amazing. This was a lot like that. So yeah, it was great.
All of those things that really give us the feel of what Zack was making with these two films, of his Excalibur, his less sci-fi, more fantasy medieval, is what I got out of it after I saw the Snyder cuts. The first time I saw the Netflix cut, I'm like, okay, I can see it more sci-fi-ish, but this is like, no, this is more fantasy than anything. And the fact that there's more aliens, that there's more atmosphere to everything, a little more magic with the cutscenes. I got a clearer picture of what he made, truly. And I think that it truly changed the theme and the tone of these films to a medieval epic for me when I watched it.
Yeah. So at the end of part 1, when Noble and the main character Korra, yeah, are fighting on top of that platform, and she knocks the teeth out of his mouth, right? It was like, in the first movie, when you watch that, it's kind of like, okay, that's just a really over the top scene. Like, it's just, I guess it's just Zack Snyder doing his thing. Like, he's wanting to show like this cool like close up of like the teeth like bouncing across the platform toward the camera, But then when you watch the director's cut, you realize that the scribes are collecting teeth from the rulers to enshrine make their little shrine. So it's just kind of like, oh, okay, I see they're trying to do something here with that, So I appreciated that. And that was kind of like the theme. I don't know what the theme is for that. I don't know why they choose teeth. I mean, this is something philosophical, probably that you can probably like really, there might even be like a line about teeth, or there might be some sort of like allusion to like teeth and some kind of legend or myth or something like that we could look into. But I just appreciate that that's there. Like, because when I watch it again, I'll probably understand more about that.
That also fixed the ending scene where he gets resurrected, because in the Netflix cut, his teeth are there as soon as he wakes up. And I was like, how the fuck are they back? But they're gone in the Snyder cuts. You see his teeth are gone. And then when I don't know what that creature was, but I love that was even more, again, fantasy, medieval is in there. That creature, that the engine of the ship is a living thing.
Oh, Kali?
And is that what it's called? Kali?
Well, the statue of the woman.
Yes.
Yeah,
so
that's Kali.
When she weeps, it seems like whatever it is, they're feeding her this organic material of fallen people or killed people, whatever it is.
Yeah.
and it uses whatever powers it has or this fuel to resurrect Noble. So it's almost like life giving at the same time. And that's when he got his teeth back from that. That made more sense now as to how he was able to get resurrected. It's not just it's advanced tech or whatever. No, there's magic involved, and that made it more oddly enough more believable to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just a matter of like, okay, was this done purely out of convenience, or is there some deeper? Was there some deeper thought to this when it was made? Yeah.
And I love that Kali was in. When I saw that in the trailers where she's breaking out and she's standing up, I'm like, oh, is this some scene where she destroys the ship or whatever?
It's in Korra's head.
And it's in Korra's head, exactly. When you see it,
yes. When I saw that in the trailer, I was like, okay, I'll let Zack do his thing. I'll watch it. But if this were anyone else, I'd be kind of like, I don't know if I'm feeling this. But then when I saw that this was in Korra's head, I was like, Zack, you madman. I'm like, my boy. I love it.
Yeah, then she gives us more like lore. Even in there, she's like, I know you're going to save us. And I'm like, oh, us? There's more of these things. These are going to be in part 3 or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like, dude, I can't imagine. I can't even imagine. And imagine a bigger budget. Like, honestly, just imagine like 200 mil for one movie.
This was 160 something, yeah.
Yeah, like for 2 movies. But like, imagine like all the issues that we have with VFX gone. And even more like crazier, nebulous, sci-fi, cosmic kind of just epic fantasies, going on. I can't wait.
Before we go into some of the reception that we've been seeing from aunties and from our mutuals, the one thing that you did not see that was missing in part 2 was, all the scenes where Korra's looking at the paintings and you keep going back to the Legend of Princess Issa and you're seeing all of these still images of the history of these worlds and all that, the whole hall of paintings that you remember in part 2.
Mm-hmm.
None of that was in the Netflix cut. None of that stuff. So all of that to me was like, holy shit, this is like frosting. I need more of this. Like, this is amazing that you get her Korra going on about Princess, the first warrior Issa or whatever, going up against the giants and how that was inspiring to her. And you're seeing all the other paintings in the background also that are just world building the histories. It's the archives or whatever. And all of that was gone. But here, it's in here. And I'm like, holy shit, like, this is truly a living, breathing world that you could, if you wanted to, make all kinds of books and lore and movies and podcasts out of. Like, you can tell all of these stories.
One thing I will say, I haven't seen part 2 of the Netflix cut, but what I can just deduce is that in the original, Princess Issa, when she is killed by Korra, it looks like basically what everyone else looks like when they're killed, right? But then you really see a dichotomy, a difference in the director's cut, because whenever anyone is shot, they have a massive hole and it's quite bloody and they're super dead. But Issa still has this very graceful, very clean, almost like it's weird. She gets like shot. She looks down. There's a light. You don't really see what's going on there. And then she falls over, and then you kind of just get a shot of like her neck up with her hair kind of like, splayed across the marbled floors, which kind of just insinuates it. But there's so much. It's like it didn't even happen, and that it's even more. It feels even more like that when constantly you see people getting shot and they're super dead, like they're as dead as a corpse can be. But then you see Issa and this scene where it's like, okay, like, did that even happen? And that really, it's in the director's cut where that disparity, that dichotomy is made. So I can only assume that it probably wasn't changed too much from the Netflix cut, and that you could tell the difference more of the directors. Is that fair to say?
Her death is essentially the same in both. Yeah.
Yes.
Not her parents though. Her parents are like super bloody, fucked up, and
Like they're gone. They're dead.
yeah. In the Netflix cut, it's not as like, oh, they're just kind of overwhelmed by these guys, and there's like stabbing noises or whatever, but you don't see them like split her neck open and shit like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of that in there.
So and they even said like was it Jimmy who said like Issa's not dead though?
Yes. Yeah. They're trying to convince him that Issa's not dead, and that's what he says. If what you say is true, then I need to continue to fight for the slain king, is what he says.
Yeah. Also, because we know people can be resurrected, we know she has life-giving powers. Kali is the source of like these life-giving abilities.
Right.
And so it would make very much sense that she is in some way connected to Kali. Like maybe she is the daughter of a Kali and a human or something like that, and she has the power of the Kali, and maybe she's like in some sort of like energy spirit form now, because you saw this like flash of light or something like that. I mean, I don't know. I just don't think that she's really like dead in the normal earthly sense of the word, like compared to everyone else who gets slaughtered.
Right.
she's not that kind of dead.
Yeah, and I almost thought that Sam was going to be the reincarnation of Issa or whatever, especially when Jimmy says, you remind me of Princess Issa. And I thought that was going to be like the thing, that it was going to be revealed. That's something I get. When we talked about it, I guessed that in part 2, it was going to be like, oh, she is princess. She's going to have the powers or whatever. And we're going to see that in part 2 in the middle of the war. Like they resurrect. Matt even might have said that
it could happen later.
Someone.
It could happen later because they gave Sam this story with Aries. Aries.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't really seem like it was immediately relevant to the story or to the plot, which makes me think that you're supposed to form a connection with these characters because the characters have a more plot-heavy relevance later. Not that everything has to be plot, but like the fact that they did that, like I can tell you right now that like what they wanted to do is they wanted to give an analog to Korra. So Korra, she defected, she found someone who she loves, she loses it, right? And it's kind of like it's not as wholesome of a story. And she's always filled with regret. She's a much darker hero, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas Sam and Aris, their story is pretty wholesome. Like they don't get like, brutally maimed or tortured, or they find love. They're like together, and they're like even like trying to put bring that shit back online was like, honestly, if you were just watching that, it's kind of like right out of Star Wars. It's very wholesome. So I feel like that was in there to kind of give you a contrast.
Yeah, that could be a reason why. And I guess we'll see how she gets resurrected when we get part 3, or if she truly is still out there or whatever it may be. And I still almost wanted it to be where maybe Sam was Issa and that's what makes Jimmy fight. Like, because remember, he doesn't fight as soon as she got killed. None of the Jimmys did. But instead, it seemed like he made his decision, or he had a choice, or she reminded him of kindness in the universe, I think is what he mentioned, something like. And that's what makes him come around and protect these villagers. Superman his way into the war and truly wreck everything.
What I will say, though, is that if this were any director, so I'm also saying this in this case, I do feel a little bit concerned that... So Korra's main grief, her main pathos is around the fact that she kills Issa, right? So if this is it is basically who Korra's character is, to resurrect or bring back the same character, erasing the guilt that Korra has. It's not kind of like the heroic journey that you kind of want, because you want the character to find their way back, like resolve, like to basically make amends with their problem, right? If you just found out their problem actually never really existed,
was a problem.
Then yeah. So I kind of hate resurrections in any story. Superman obviously is a whole different thing. Like that's a very clear like birth, death, birth sort of situation going on there that doesn't really have to do with like any personal like self-actualization. Like it's not like, his death isn't it's not quite the same thing, right? But with this, it definitely is a motivation for the protagonist. So I'm curious to see how that will play going forward.
You were heavy on X when this came out, and you were discussing it, and I was enjoying all of it, especially watching you come at some of the criticisms, but also praise, and not just in this movie, but just in cinema in general that's been surrounding this film itself. What have you seen from mutuals and antis while you've been on X or any other social media platform that you might have been on during this film's release? Has anything surprised you at all about the reaction to this film from either side, or has it all been predictable? As we've seen already, copy and paste reviews of both versions. A lot of these antis did both, but at the same time, a lot of them went in and watched them, as you and I were saying before we recorded. Some of these people watched these movies before we did, and we're Zack Snyder fans, and the anti-Snyder fans watched it before we did. They like ran in there and they're like, "Oh, I watched all 6 hours and this was even worse."
Yeah.
Like, I don't know about you, but when I see anything that I'm like, "Oh, fuck this," like the MCU, I'm like, I'm done with that shit. I don't go in and go, "Well, let me see how much worse this next one is." Like, I just don't see them.
Yeah, it's a tale as old as time, man.
They're still seeing every bit of it.
Yeah. I don't know. So one day, I don't know, like I'm just waiting for one day something crazy to happen. Like and this is pretty crazy intense of a connection, but it's the first thing that came to my head, so I'm gonna say it. Do you remember when that news came out that like these actors were involved in like this crazy like sex cult? You remember that when that came out? And like some of the Smallville actors were involved in it.
Yes.
And like, okay. So we know crazy stuff can happen in Hollywood. One of these days, I feel like I'm going to just open the news and I'm going to find out that there's just crazy, like behind the scenes, like betrayals and just like dark stuff going on. And Zack was implicated. Not like he had anything to do with it, but like maybe they have something against Zack because the reason why I'm going this extreme with my little conceptualization here is because nothing justifies or legitimizes the amount of just vitriol that people have. I'm a deep thinker, and I don't know. I throw my hands up every time. I'm constantly going between, is it malice or is it ineptitude? Like, is it somewhere in between? I have zero idea. Because Zack is clearly not an inept filmmaker. Like, his stuff looks good. His stories are understandable. Like, you can follow it. The acting performances are fine. The music is always pretty cool. He puts like really good music guys on there. So if I'm just like a guy who just takes everything at face value, I watch his thing, I'm like, hey, that was pretty cool. At the very least. I have no idea why people think that he's like literally the worst thing to ever happen to cinema.
It's because funny. He made a Superman movie they didn't like.
I guess. I don't know. It has to be. Superman is not that important. He's not really actually that important. There has to be something else deeper. There's got to be. But one day we're going to find, it's all going to break open. Like, there might be a documentary. It might even be after the relevant actors and directors and producers are, once they're no longer with us, maybe it might be like way in the future, but there's something going on here that I don't know if I'll ever know.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is more simply narrative setting, as in, for a while there, he was the biggest threat to the MCU, and Disney and all these shills, whether they were paid or not, they saw that Zack was truly a competitor to these films, and they did every single thing in their power to make sure that the worst things possible were said about Man of Steel, BVS, that whole cinematic universe, because
I don't know if I agree with that. I don't know if I agree with that. And the reason why I say that, well, look at Shyamalan, right? Like, he's gotten crapped on and he's come back and he's gonna, like, quote unquote, like, in the narrative. Like, I don't think he ever really went anywhere, but I've yet to see Trap. I want to see that soon. I've just been very busy staying up till 3:00 watching Zack stuff. But like, okay, if they have done away with Snyder and he's no longer a threat to the MCU, then why are they still campaigning against him? So I don't know. I don't think there is a logical explanation. I think there's something else, going on, because it's no one has received a blacklisting or has received criticism or a campaign against them in Hollywood that they have not been able to recover from, or where the criticism hasn't subsided,
Well, and I think if
Um,
there was some weird, deep, dark thing, it would have come out by now because that's how much they hate the guy. But because he doesn't have that, they're
I
just going
guess.
with after every little thing that they can. Oh, this was too
But
fucking whatever.
but why? There's got to be. So if he's this great person who just spreads like love and joy to whoever he interacts with, which I think so. I haven't met him personally, but he seems like a really good person to me. Then you think that would just spill out and it would just come back around. But for whatever reason, the forces that be just constantly want to destroy him no matter where he goes. Like, what is he a threat to? What is he threatening?
Yeah,
So
he was once a member of the Illuminati, and he defected. And he's putting in these little clues in movies like Rebel Moon, where he puts in the pyramid with the eye in there, and they're the villains.
are you saying that ironically?
know.
Or is this for another podcast?
I don't know. Maybe it's a conspiracy.
We talked about him and his Mason proclivities.
It's in there.
And like, man, me, Manu, and several other people from the Snyder Cut community got together to write that article about the All the Gods shirt and all that Masonic imagery and like breaking all that down. Like, it's like, what other director does that?
Right. He defected from them, and now they're mad at him. They're like, nope, well, you can't, you're not going to have success without us unless you're a part of it. And he's like, no.
Yeah, like we can't let him spread the secrets. Yeah, I don't know. It's crazy. One day.
Yeah. Well, maybe this year, like, what's his name? We'll say Cat Williams, 2024 is the year of truth. All will be revealed.
I don't know if I want to be set free by that truth.
Yeah, real life is a lot scarier than fantasy, that's for sure. Well, let's move on to, obviously we prefer the Snyder cuts of this, and it's pretty clear as to why. As far as viewers, because I talked to one of my friends who saw Rebel Moon when it first came out, parts 1 and 2 Netflix cuts, enjoyed them, he liked them a lot, and he's a big sci-fi guy. And then I told him, hey, the director's cuts are out now, and he's like, oh, cool. He didn't run and watch them though, and it seems like that was most of the general audiences, like, oh, well, I saw the other one and I liked them. They didn't feel the need to go and watch the R-rated version. It truly was for the fans and for his haters. They were the only ones who were going to watch these cuts. So based on the numbers that we're kind of seeing, would you recommend either version? Would you recommend the Netflix cut for anyone at all? Would you say that that's like good for maybe teens or even kids that want to get into something sort of sci-fi that's not Star Wars? Or would you say, no, wait, grow up and eventually watch and wait for the Snyder cuts?
Yeah, because my ideal future is a Rebel Moon universe that doesn't have the Netflix cut is also the Snyder cut. There's one cut and it's his cut. That's my ideal. So if I have anything to say about it, that's going to be a cul-de-sac. You know what I'm going to say? So I'm not going to recommend anyone watch something that's a part of what I hope to be a cul-de-sac. And I just think that, I don't know. I think that they should put more trust. I feel like this is very similar. It's not exactly the same. It's not analogous, but it's similar to the BVS situation, right? Where you have an extended edition that adds more to it. Now, of course, this is an extended edition. I'll call it an extended edition, but it's the most comprehensive, the most unique extended edition that we've ever seen. So it isn't to say that this is like just, a little extra time or just a little. This is the most extended edition that you've ever seen. But I think that if Netflix puts the kind of faith in Zack that Warner Brothers didn't do with with BVS, I think that we can see there were issues that could have been rectified back then. That I think by putting the actual movie out, it was a little bit longer. The R-rated thing would never have happened with BVS Extended Edition if it weren't a home release. Like they would have made the extended cut and they would have put it out and they would have just called it PG-13 because it was basically a PG-13 movie. It wasn't an R-rated movie. And I think that it would have, a lot of narratives would have been fixed. I also think that just having a cut that's made to be less good, right, is just not really great for the narrative. And I think if you're resolved to believing that nothing is going to fix Zack's narrative, like there is some super deep, dark conspiracy that no business decision can fix, and that as long as we're getting what we want, that's all we could ask for. Well, I personally feel like that's kind of a loser mentality, you know? So I kind of gone off topic a little bit, but I would say Zack might not be for you. His movies he's very provocative.
Mm-hmm.
So his movies might not be for you. In which case, I recommend that you check another great movie out by a different director.
Or even some of his past work. That's perfectly appropriate for whatever.
Yeah.
It won't have old lady titties.
Yeah, I was kind of like, interesting. Turok's kind of freaky.
When people read that in the book, they found the actor that plays that character, and they're like, "There's no way they're gonna." That's another example of they're not gonna do that. There's just this background character. Oh, they fucking did it. Yeah, she's in bed with him and everything. Good stuff, man. Well, if you did see both versions of Rebel Moon, let us know what your thoughts were, which you prefer. Especially if you like the Netflix cut more. I'm more curious as to your thoughts, your opinions, your whys. Let us know on X. There will be a link in the description of today's episode to both Millenial Mike and I's X accounts. But Millenial, please let them know other places they can find you and other projects you're currently working on.
Okay. Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at TheExilesNet. You can find me. You can read my work on my Substack as well as listen to vocal read versions of my articles on my Substack, which is millennialmike.substack.com, millennialmike.substack.com. On Discord, you can find me on the Exilesnet server, as well as The Reason I'm Broke, as well as the Lazy Gaming Guys Discord server as well. I spend most of my time on mine and Reason I'm Broke, but those are the places you can find me on Discord. Yeah.
Will this be the end of Rebel Moon discussion on your social medias, or are you still processing? When will be the next time you revisit the two films?
So this is something that, and for the 600 episode, you guys are going to get an exclusive sneak peek to what's going on in mine. Well, you saw it happening on the timeline. So me and Manu are getting back the gang back together.
Yes.
Yes. Me, Manu, and Fabrice, so Fab, and then I also have Jesse, who is with me on Running Council. We all have a chat going on. We did a little call. We kind of discussed some ideas. We need some equipment because some of our equipment has gone bad or has been bad since the last time we were recording together, and we just never replaced it, right? So we're all going to get back onto our grind, and we're going to try to get something a little more sustainable together, because back in the day, we were like recording, like, shoot, man. Sometimes we were recording like an episode a day. Like, it was crazy. And we had enough people to actually edit them. But we're going to get some more sustainable down, and we're going to try to get back into a routine. And of course, me and Manu, we're the dynamic duo. So it's going to be awesome. So
I miss
keep
Manu,
your eyes
man.
up for that. Yeah,
I miss Manu, and I miss
too.
your discussions between both of you. And he takes a little jab every now, even when he was on last time with you, me and Manu, and take a little jab.
We're very tight. Like, he's not afraid.
No.
He's the only person I've ever recorded with who's not afraid to criticize me, which I appreciate that. Like, he really like kind of has this good antagonism with me. And then I go back and forth, and it's fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a good, like, big brother, little brother type of thing. Like, I really enjoy it, and it's a lot of fun to listen to, and I'm really excited to see that and see what kind of projects you're coming up with, what discussions are going to arise from whatever it is. Like, all I saw on X is what I know and what you're hearing here. So if you at all enjoy any part of this podcast and you want more cinema, you want to definitely check out the Exiles Network, the Exiles podcast, and follow Millennial Mike, because there's a lot of that, I'm assuming, coming. And they do what we do here, but way more cinema focused especially. So I appreciate it, Millennial, you being on, and I'm as a fan and a friend, I'm really excited for what you have coming.
I can't wait to be a part of it.
And to you on the other side, yes, 600 episodes, as Millennial Mike has said. The last time we did 300, and it was from fucking Zack Snyder's 300, you know, the same font and everything. And
the chances that
double
any number lands on a Zack Snyder episode is pretty high, though.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. Like, what are the odds of Zack Snyder episode?
It's like, they're pretty high.
Yeah, like if you go back on this episode list for the podcast, like most of it has like been Zack Snyder news. There's one coming up that's released as of this episode's launch, but it's Kojay's audio to the Q&A for Rebel Moon, which he gave me permission to put up with credit and all that. So that's up now. And so, yeah, it was going to be something Zack Snyder related. If not, it was going to be Xbox related. But yeah, like you said, the odds are high. It's going to be something Zack Snyder. And we got Twilight of the Gods coming up soon. Gamescom, Xbox will be there. So we're probably going to do, next episode will be with Maceo for sure, at least, to cover the Gamescom announcements. And yeah, a lot of really exciting stuff coming out the rest of the year. The new Xbox console, even though it's a revision or whatever you want to call it, I'll be getting that and I'll be discussing it. So plenty to show up and discuss Twilight of the Gods when Zack releases that. And whatever next project he's got a UFC movie apparently coming out. He's got some deal with Dana White, whether it's a documentary, I'm not sure. And Ngannou was in the director's cut of part 1. He was the fighter that's like, yeah, Titus is over there, like he's shadowboxing. That's a UFC fighter. So clearly Zack is either a fan or he's got connections to the UFC world. And I'm excited to see, as someone who watches UFC pay-per-views every month, I'm excited to see what UFC project Zack Snyder has coming up. But thank you so much for sticking with us, whether this has been your first episode of the show or your 600th. We really appreciate all the time and support and the interactions that we get on Discord and on X. If you want to help out the podcast, leave us a review on your podcatcher. If there's a star rating, or especially on Apple Podcasts, if you're subscribed on there, just take 2 minutes, leave us a review. On our Facebook page as well, there's a little rating system. Whatever you use, whatever's convenient, if you have a second, go for it. A little bit helps us out. But once again, thank you for joining us. I've been Daniel, joined by Millennial Mike and Brokehead Core. All will be well.